All right, welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. Fortunately, can't be with us this week, but in spirit, I think you gave him a nice image, right, Brian? Our normal co-host, Patrick Minton. You can see him on NBA Geek on Twitter. And like I said, he's with us in spirit, and he's done a lot of work. So all the numbers on Boxscore Geek are up and running for this season. That's what we'll be talking. And then, as always, our show is produced by Brian Foster, who you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Say hey, Brian.
What's going on, Dre? And boy, it's been a hell of a first week in the NBA. We've got this battle of the undefeateds coming on right after we finish taping this show. The Warriors and the Clippers both at 4-0. So we'll be talking a lot about them and some of the other teams early in the season, too. This is pretty exciting stuff, Dre.
I was going to say, if you don't know, Brian Foster is a Warriors fan. Patrick Minton is a pseudo Wolves fan because he's from Minnesota originally, and then he lives in Seattle. But obviously, they don't have a team, and I don't count the Thunder. I was a Nuggets fan, but I'm not as much so anymore.
But still a Kenneth Faried fan, right? Gotta love
I
that
love
guy.
Kenneth Faried, but I would just prefer at this point him to end up someplace good.
Oh,
But regardless, so we're about a week into the new NBA season, a little over, and it has been amazing. Oh my God, I can't tell you how much I've missed basketball. I mean, heck, easy sign is there are actually articles back on the site again. This off season was getting pretty dry, and we didn't have much to talk about. So basically, what we're going to do this show is I'm actually going to give a quick tutorial. I'm kind of in teacher mode this week, obviously, about kind of some sites that you could use for advanced stats if during the NBA season, and then we're actually going to talk some of the numbers on that site. So let's just fire them up. So basically, this is kind of a walk through the
oh yeah.
internet where you can go for data, and then we'll be talking that data. So Brian, fire up the first one. Basically, if you didn't know this, if you're listening to this podcast, you didn't know, Basketball Reference is a must look at. And if you hop over to Basketball Reference, they have a seasons tab, and you can check out a season summary. So I'm looking at the full URL, I'll include it in the links, is basketballreference.com/leagues/NBA_2006.html. This is just kind of a must-have landing page if you're paying attention to the NBA season. There, all of these charts. And the one that you want to look at, Brian, if you scroll down, it's miscellaneous stats. It's kind of in the middle.
Ooh, I can't
There are
wait.
links. There are links to all this. Let's do the cheap one, Brian. If you sort
Miscellaneous
by
stats. Here we go.
yeah. If you sort by MOV, that's margin of victory, what team appears at the top?
Yeah, and this was our biggest first note of the day. Golden State Warriors with a 25-point margin, and that was increased from 16.67 after the 50-point win over the Memphis Grizzlies. Man, so we had a show last year, Dre, that I think you called it small sample size theater, right? Because we're early in
Yeah,
the
I mean,
season. It's only been 4 games. But they were a historic team last season. It looks like they're doing historic things again this season.
this is kind of I, I I'll put it this way. I keep track of how much teams win and lose by game. It's data I need. And you might want to compare that to Vegas that has an estimate of how much they think teams will win and lose by. I thought I had a typo when after the day the Memphis Grizzlies game had, because I didn't watch the game, but I came in, I was updating, and I was looking, I was like -50 for Memphis. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I messed something up there. Did I cut and paste wrong? And I looked back and no, the Golden State Warriors blew out the Memphis Grizzlies by 50. And I mean, it's hard to say because it is the beginning of the season, and the Grizzlies are one of those teams where, I mean, I would argue that essentially it's kind of hard to know how good they're going to be. They've traditionally been very good, but the Grizzlies, they're older. Mark Gasol looks horrible. Zach Randolph's a bit older. Currently they're 1-4 on a bad team, but regardless, a 50-point blowout of a team in the West is kind of absurd. And it's worth noting. I think you put this in right. The Pelicans made the playoffs last season. They've blown them out 2 games in a row. And who was the fourth team they blew out? Also a
The
playoff team.
Rockets, yeah, and we'll talk about them more later.
And the Rockets, the Rockets and the Grizzlies are 2 teams, and we can talk more, I guess, as we're looking down this chart. But basically, I like the miscellaneous stats chart on Basketball Reference. There's also all sorts of other ones. You obviously get a league standing at the top. You can break down most stuff if you want, and it's sortable. So this is a must-have page, and that's the one we want to talk about. So what I'm actually going to sort by now on the miscellaneous stats, Brian, and we can talk a little more, is the SRS, the simple rating system. Now, it's one thing I'll give this, which is kind of a common flaw in a lot of, I'll put it in quotes, advanced stats. It's an overly complicated metric. That said, it actually is a good metric if you want to essentially look at strength of schedule adjusted margin of victory. So sorry to break this down to you, Brian. Golden State Warriors aren't actually a plus 25 win a game team. They are only, put that in quotes, a 17-point win a game team, in part because the Pelicans and the Grizzlies aren't playing very well. But the number two team behind the Warriors, you were interested in this, and this is, I mean, I'm really sad Patrick can't be here because I made a joke when Patrick was doing his preseason show. Basically, every time Patrick brought up Rudy Gobert, because I listened to the show back and was writing notes, I basically made a joke to myself and said, every time Patrick says Rudy Gobert is underrated, is snubbed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, take a shot. And one of the things Patrick was really a fan of was, the over on the Utah Jazz. He basically said, hey, this team has Gobert. It's got a lot going for it. You mentioned it has favors. So, if we look, we'll get to this page later, but we'll talk more about it. But there's the players tab on Boxscore Geeks. And basically, Rudy Gobert and Derek Favors, holy cow, what a front court. And they are leading that team to an absurd margin of victory.
Yeah, and even their guards are playing above average, and we didn't like their guards too much coming into the season. So, yeah, we'll have to see how it goes. But, yeah, any team with Gobert can go pretty far. I mean, we expect him to be in the MVP talk at the beginning of the season, and he is not disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, I think last year, this is one of those statistics that is always rough for me because I argue, the non defense adjusted stats. So if by that what I mean is like we do keep track of rebounds, we do keep track of blocks, we do keep track of steals. When people say the box score doesn't account for defense, they're just wrong, right? That is just simply not true. That said, the defense that is essentially impacting how good an opponent shoots is hard to kind of track, and it looked like Gobert, like everybody I'd listened to, it essentially said this guy is the real deal on that, and basically deserves. Arturo listed him as his defensive player of the year last season. So with that said, Gobert is without being able to account for that, Gobert is already one of the best centers in the league right now, and if you argue he has that additionally, I mean, holy cow, they have a center that's essentially 4 to 5 times as good as average, and again, the center is like the toughest position, so having 4 or 5 times the best at the toughest position, and Derek Favors is currently playing 4 times as well as a power forward. That's absurd as well.
Yeah, and they have even more big men on the bench, so yeah, they're in good shape, I think, this season.
Yeah, I mean, well, we'd always kind of. I am interested in the point you made. So essentially, Rodney Hood, Alec Burks, Trey Burke, I think it's Raul Neto, and I believe he's a rookie. They actually have 4 guards playing significantly above average. And you said small sample size theater, and I think that's important. As we're going through all these numbers, as we're talking about how impressed with all these teams, it's worth noting it's a week. In a week, anything can happen. In a week, the Cleveland Cavaliers can look like they are as good as the Warriors for a couple games. I hate to break this to you. We talked about this last week. The Warriors were just a way better team than the Cavaliers. And while it was an impressive showing by the Cavaliers, and while it did take, essentially the Warriors playing the worst they'd been playing and the Cavaliers playing way over their heads, that's what you can expect to happen. Any given week you can see a team and you go, oh my God, what's happening? I mean, we could even argue, right? Steph Curry, we expect to be an MVP caliber player this season. Maybe I'll have to, swallow my words later. I can't expect this type of performance we're seeing out of him to continue.
No, I mean, he's produced 2 full wins on his own in 4 games. That's crazy. I doubt that's happened very many times in NBA history.
I mean, I could definitely tell you players like Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, definitely gone on runs. LeBron James have gone on runs over a couple games, so it's not unheard of. But I mean, all I'll just say is, yeah, as we're talking all these teams, as we're talking all the impressive stuff, especially when we're going to bring up, and I'm sure this will come up more as like rookies, we just have to note that any player can play really well for a couple games. Don't forget Jeremy Lin. Any player can just play horribly for a couple games. LeBron James looked a little off before the end of last season. So, we'll just keep pounding that drum. But that said, we are sports fans. We're not going to wait till the end of the season to talk about this. And, we are stats fans. And so we definitely get impressed by like weird pop-ups. So I'm going to let you keep going, Brian. Any team on the miscellaneous stats or basketball reference, as I mentioned, a must go to page for anybody who's interested. But is there anything else that's kind of interesting you on it?
No, I think I'm ready for the next site. We want to go to Popcorn Machine.
Okay, well, I mean, we're probably not going to talk too much, but I do think
Oh,
this is
okay.
important. I do actually like this. So let's go to Popcorn Machine. I think this is a must-go-to site for any NBA stats fan, especially people that use the BS argument, just watch the games, because it's not really possible. You cannot watch all of the games. You know, a given NBA game is 48 minutes long. If you were lucky enough to have some like video editor who cut it down to be exactly what you wanted to watch, it would still be, essentially an hour per game somewhere, I'm overestimating. But, there are 1,230 NBA games in a season. So, it's not really viable to think that you're going to have time to watch 1,230 hours of video. So that's why I actually really like Popcorn Machine. It is one of my favorite sites. So, Brian, do you have a specific game you want to? Let's do the Nuggets. Let's give the Nuggets some love.
Sure. Yeah, I've got.
So,
Let's see.
actually, this is fun. I get to have some fun by doing this. So, if you click on the game flow for the Denver Los Angeles Lakers game, if you just go to popcornmachine.net, it's in the top left corner.
Yeah, we got it up right now, and I think I am sharing my Skype with you now, so you can check it out.
I'm not. Unfortunately, I'm looking at my screen to try. But anyway, I want to point something out to you. If you look in the second quarter, D'Angelo Russell, not great. He goes 1 for 4, but he gets 3 assists. And then in the third quarter, you can hover. If you hover over the bars, it'll show you what they did. So in the third quarter, D'Angelo Russell goes 2 for 4, 1 for 2 from 3, gets an assist and a rebound. Man, this rookie who is supposed to be the hope of the franchise is playing pretty well. And you will notice he is completely absent in the fourth quarter, where the Lakers just, fell to the Nuggets. They couldn't come back. And I'd argue, you look at this Kobe Bryant fellow who is horrible. He went 0, in the fourth quarter, Kobe Bryant goes 0 for 1, 2 personal fouls and 1 assist. I mean, the way we basically break down performance is when a player's on the court, we expect them to be doing something, getting rebounds, getting passes, getting points, getting blocks, something. And if a player is doing nothing, they're actually negative to the team, right? Because you could kind of picture this. If you were playing on a team, Brian, and you did absolutely nothing, and the opponent's scoring roughly
very likely, considering my basketball skill.
Exactly. And the opponent's scoring a point per possession, you're pretty much actually like keeping your team a point down. So Kobe Bryant is horrendous in the fourth. And I mean, let's just point out in the third, actually, he did do decent on assists, but, he shot 1 for 4 in the third. Kobe Bryant was just not doing well, but he plays the whole game. D'Angelo Russell, this upcoming rookie, the future of the franchise, the excitement they had, sits in the fourth and they lose, by 11 points to the Nuggets. What a horrendous thing. And this is why I like Popcorn Machine, is when you see games that kind of confuse you. You might see something. This is a common one. I'm sure you're going to see this a lot this season, Brian. You might see, for instance, the Warriors, and you go, "Wow, why did if you're a fantasy fan, you might say, "Wow, I was really expecting Steph Curry to get 35 minutes last game. Why on earth didn't Steph Curry?" And by the way, I scrolled down one, so I'm looking at the Memphis Grizzlies Golden State Warrior game on the second. You might go, man, why didn't Steph Curry get the minutes I was expecting? And you realize that Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Festus Ezeli, Harrison Barnes, the entire starting 5 of the Warriors sat the entire fourth quarter, and also Andre Iguodala, he started a couple minutes in the fourth and then sat. The Warriors were playing all the way to the bottom of the bench. The very last bench player on the Warriors played almost the entire fourth after that blowout, which is remarkable.
Yeah, and just for the people that are watching on video, to give them some context for how these charts work, basically for this Warriors part we've got up right now, the yellow part is when that player is not in the game, but then the blue part that has some numbers in it, that's when they are in the game. So what this really shows is which players are in the game at which times, right?
And then the nice part about it is they actually have some basic numbers, which aren't great. I mean, this is the same box score problem, right? The number of points, you have to look at efficiency, so you have to hover. But you can hover over any given player and see how well they did it. I mean, holy cow, look at this third quarter out of Steph Curry last game. Goes 7 for 8, including perfect from the 3. Gets 4 free throws. Also gets a rebound. Gets 2 assists, 3 steals, and a block for good measure. That on its own, as like I said, I'm bringing up fantasy, That in its own would be an absurd fantasy performance for most point guards. That's a third quarter for Steph Curry.
He did so much stuff that the pop-up on Popcorn Machine like barely fits in the window. Like he just did a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I've got nice resolution on my monitor, but yeah, I'm looking at that. That is freaking absurd. But again, this is a good site. Start with Basketball Reference. You can see, teams win-loss records, get some basic stats like shooting or point margin. If you're curious about what happened in a specific game, you can hop over to Popcorn Machine. It's basically you can use the play-by-play as well, but I like Popcorn Machine a lot more than the play-by-play because it's a lot easier to parse. Watching the game, reading the play-by-play takes a lot of time. Popcorn Machine can tell you a lot of stories, and there are things that have happened. For instance, this hurt some other stuff, but DeMarcus Cousins went out of a game with injury a while ago, and the opposing center played really well, which isn't surprising because, in theory, DeMarcus Cousins is good at defense and is really good at rebounding, etc. So, if you have questions like, man, why did this other player play well? You can look and go, oh, this player got into foul trouble, or oh, this player got injured, or oh, they were blowing them out. All this information is very useful, and I think it's a must-go-to site for any fan. So, I'm not going to lie, though, Brian. Let's go to the third site. This is the very first site I pretty much go to every morning.
Oh, boxscoregeeks.com/players.
Yes, and what I will say is I'm a little annoyed. We may want to change the thing. If you sort by wins produced, that's the WP column, it shows you currently, according to our metric, who is leading the NBA in wins. And then the next column over, points over par per 48, that's pop 48, tells you that to re-explain this metric, if I had a team of average players playing a team of average players, except my guy was subbed in for one of those average players and they played a full 48 minutes, how much would I expect my team to win or lose by? So basically, Steph Curry could be put on an average team. They play an average team, and you'd expect that our team with Steph Curry to win by 21.4 points, which I should stress is currently more than the number 2 and number 3 best players, Jimmy Butler and Andre Drummond, in the league put together. And I should stress, Andre Drummond just had, a 20.29 rebound game, I believe.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
And I think it is funny because I want to avoid I told you so syndrome. One of the teams we didn't talk, but the Atlanta Hawks, I believe, were the 4th team on the margin of victory scale that we looked at, Brian.
Yeah.
And, that was one of the things Patrick said is, he basically said he thought the Hawks were underrated and they're playing very well right now, and that's great. However, another thing that's going on, and it's funny, is Patrick said one thing and I said another. The Detroit Pistons are playing very well right now, and I basically said, hey, if you've got, one of the best players in the league like Andre Drummond, there's always hope. So, I do want to avoid getting into, hey, we told you so. See, we're validated, because in a week or two that can be completely upended. One of my favorite players for this was Andrea Bargnani. You can always bash Andrea Bargnani, but you always have to be careful about when you bash him, because he'll have, as we kind of mentioned, he can have a 3 or 4 game stretch where he plays very well. And if he does that, then you're like, oh, well, crap, I don't want to act like I told you so. But that said, yeah. Andre Drummond is kind of playing out of his mind too. That's what's fascinating here. Jimmy Butler and Andre Drummond are playing amazing right now, and they still look like ants essentially compared to Steph Curry.
Yeah, Jimmy Butler is also looking like an MVP candidate, and it's not too surprising. I guess as his star caliber kind of rises, they let him take more and more shots, and he's just so efficient that, that's a good idea, Bulls. Let that guy shoot.
Yeah, this is one of those, and by the way, I'll just some kind of inside NBA talk about the site. I will always delete, I will delete bad comments in the comment section, especially when they kind of assert fact that I know is not true or doesn't stack up with reality. Because I wrote about the usage curve this year or this week, that is a common thing that comes up. Basically, if you give a player more shots, you don't expect them to, shoot as well. And what you can look at, and by the way, even one of our, I guess, nemesis who, currently works for the Memphis Grizzlies, even, John Hollinger said his data basically said the opposite, which is, as players kind of get more shots, you might expect them to improve. And Jimmy Butler, if you just look at his field goal attempts per year and his shooting efficiency per year, he's basically got an upward trend. The last 4 years, I actually clicked on Jimmy Butler. So if you're on the players tab, you can also click on the player. That'll take them to a page that shows all of their career stats, and I scroll to the bottom. Jimmy Butler in 2013, 2014, 52.4% on 12 shots, 14-15, 58.3% on 17 shots per 48, and then this year, 60.9% true shooting on 19 shots per game. So it's kind of like, all right, the idea of just letting him shoot more, it doesn't seem to match reality. And I will just say the same. I'm glad two comments I made appear to be holding up, which is I said the Pistons, as long as they have Drummond, have hope, and I said the Bulls look great, except as long as they have Derrick Rose, he's pretty much going to shoot them out of games. And it's not hard. I'm going to stand by that. If you reverse sort, if you click on wins produced again, Brian, it'll reverse sort the list. And then you look at the wins produced players in reverse order. Currently, this pains my heart a little. Emmanuel Mudiay currently has negative zero point 0.7 wins for the Nuggets, who've played 4 games. That's not a good thing. Number 2, though, is Derrick Rose with negative zero point 0.5 wins. So, Derrick Rose isn't back. I mean, I'm not surprised by that. Maybe that changes, and we'll be the first to tell you if it does. But, some of the comments we made in the preseason show, I get tickled pink when I get to say, hey, I was right. And, I basically said Andre Drummond is amazing, and I said Derrick Rose is going to shoot the Bulls out of stuff, and currently those things are holding up, so I'm happy about that.
Yeah, and I do want to, kind of go against what you said earlier, and D'Angelo Russell is on this list too. He hasn't been great either overall, even though he was good in that game tonight. So
let's talk another cool trick on this page, because again, this is a nice tutorial to cheat to tell people about the page. So and for the listeners,
thinly veiled, Dre, thinly veiled.
What I hope you've done, listener, even if you're in your car, is you've opened up your laptop, gone to the boxscoregeeks.com, and are going along with us. Okay, so on the players page, Patrick has an awesome tab, the Show Only Rookies tab. So if you click on Show Only Rookies, you'll see a check mark next to Only Rookies, and we can basically take a look at how rookies are performing right now. And it's worth noting that we actually have some very good rookies right now. That one of the surprise ones for me is with DeMarcus Cousins going down, he's gotten more minutes. But Willie Cauley-Stein, I hope I said that right. On rookie pages, I'm going to muck up at least a couple names. I apologize, especially as there's a huge influx of international players. So Karl Anthony Towns, he had he had a good first game, a really good second game, a not so good third game. He's on here, but there are going to be some rookies that are just going to play bad. And I think one thing about Emmanuel Mudiay that we have to kind of remember is he had, in his opening game, he had 11 turnovers. And it's really important to remember when we're talking about players, especially on like 4 or 5 games, is one really, really good game. We just mentioned Steph Curry, who had, I don't even know points over par for that specific quarter. But that third quarter was probably worth like half a win on its own in that blowout against Memphis. Emmanuel Mudiay had a horrible first game where I think he had 11 turnovers. So when players have really bad games, it is tough to come back from. What I will say, unfortunately, about Emmanuel Mudiay is he is yet to have a good game, which is unfortunate. And what's kind of funny is if you kind of piecemeal some of his games together. In his first game against Houston, he shot really well. In his last game, he passed really well. In his third game, he had good rebounds. In his fourth game, he was good at steals and blocks. Basically, I think you called it like a Russell Westbrook stat line where they just do everything. Emmanuel Mudiay has shown he can do everything. He can shoot, he can block, he can pass, he can steal. He's just also turning the ball over. He's averaging, I think, if I'm doing math right, whatever. Sorry, I apologize.
30. What's 35 divided by 4? Yeah, it's
25
tough.
divided by 4. He's averaging
25.
He's averaging 6 turnovers per game at this point. He's had 2 games where he's gotten into 4 fouls. Point guards don't usually foul. For his talk, I love you. I mean, this is such a Kobe thing to do, Mudiay. After last game, he told I think it was Byron Scott said he didn't think Mudiay was a point guard, and he got 10 assists and said, "Hi, guess he shouldn't have said that." We also got 6 turnovers, so it's kind of like, he's still got a lot of the rough things about rookies wrong, particularly what I would call like the DeMarcus Cousins problem. He's got turnovers and personal fouls. If he gets those in control, he could do something. He does need to get his shooting in shape. I mean, one thing I'll give him, is he is shooting from 3, and if he could just kind of rein that in a little, we could see something good. So sorry to go off on a tangent on Mudiay. He is currently the worst player in the NBA according to our numbers, in front of Derrick Rose. He is a rookie. The good news I'll say is he's showing that he can do stuff. The bad news is he's also doing some bad stuff.
At least they're playing him though. Dre, the Memphis fans were kind of upset after the 50-point loss that they didn't even get any of their young rookies. Or Anderson, maybe he's a second-year player, but they didn't even put him in the game. They put Vince Carter in instead. Garbage time. So at least Mudiay's getting in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do think that's important, and I think it's a fascinating thing that not a lot of teams do. And I actually would argue that the Warriors have been doing this well. I mean, what I want to stress is any team can kind of do stuff right for a season or two, and then we can see them fall apart. The Denver Nuggets are like my favorite example of this, where there were tons of things they did right, few things went wrong, and now they're in the crapper. But if you've got young players, they've got to get reps, they've got to learn stuff, and if you're a bad team, it always shocks me, and we've said this when a bad team plays older veteran players. Sorry, going back to the list, I will say, unfortunately, we like Jahlil Okafor. He's currently in the dumpster too. D'Angelo Russell is another one that you mentioned. I mean, essentially, it's not surprising to see, rookie players, young players. Andrew Wiggins is at the bottom of the list of this list as well. This is one of the fun things to do. Look at the worst players in the league. But all I'll stress is, we also see players like I think Marc Gasol's down here, Kobe Bryant, and Kobe Bryant is currently tied with Andrea Bargnani in bad wins. All I'll stress is we see some players we expect to see down here. We see some young players. We see some players we don't expect to see. And what essentially is going to have to happen is we're just going to have to wait, a couple weeks before things kind of normalize to see what happens there. Two players I do want to really stress at the top of the list in small sample size theater, though, Brian. According to the wins produced formula, currently ranked 4th and 5th in overall wins in the NBA, Kyle Lowry and Blake Griffin. These were two players last season where Kyle Lowry played, as we mentioned, like a star and then seemed to tail off. And we said, hopefully he's back. And you mentioned he was tearing it up in the preseason.
Yeah,
and,
that came from Patrick originally. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness, if he isn't still tearing it up, playing like a star guard, 4 times as good as average, basically a plus 10-point margin on his own per 48. The Raptors are a contender if Lowry's healthy. Number 5 is Blake Griffin. This was a player that we had kind of mentioned had a Vince Carter-esque look, where basically if you looked at the age curve, he looked all set to take off last season, and then he stalled, kind of just like Vince Carter. But then in the playoffs, oh my goodness,
right.
he was essentially not quite a triple-double, but the funny thing about things like triple-doubles for me is when we adjust for players by position. When we basically consider that Blake Griffin is a power forward and not a point guard, the fact that he's getting 5 assists per 48 as a power forward to go along. I mean, look at these lines: 42 points per 48 minutes, 13.2 rebounds, 5 assists per 48 minute from a power forward. That is absurd. So, I got to give those two shout outs. These were two players that we kind of had injury worry about last season. They seem to be back. Let's finish these. Let's finish out the top 10 because one of them is going to make me laugh to myself a little. DeAndre Jordan. We actually made a mistake when we were talking how am I dropping this name? Help me out. The Mark Cuban Dallas Mavericks.
Yes.
Okay, so the Dallas Mavericks, we said Dwight Howard. Essentially, their offseason, one of the big reasons they're in such disrepair is they pushed hard for DeAndre Jordan in the offseason. When they didn't get him, the cupboard was kind of bare at that point. But he's living up to the hype, He's still doing well in the Clippers. We mentioned we have a battle of undefeateds coming. And, I love Chris Paul. Chris Paul is one of my favorite players. But DeAndre Jordan is one of the legit MVP candidates on this team.
And Dre, finish up, please.
I was going to say, I wrote the article about how I thought DeAndre Jordan was an MVP candidate.
Yeah.
What I'll stress is basically the Clippers right now, sorry about that, the Clippers right now have 3, in my opinion, MVP-worthy players: Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, and Chris Paul. And that's absurd.
Yeah, and all I was going to jump in there with is Blake Griffin's getting a ton of credit for the mainstream media, mostly because he's scoring so many points. 42 points per 48 minutes is a lot. But yeah, like you said, DeAndre Jordan has actually produced more per minute than Blake Griffin. And he's basically looking like Wilt Chamberlain out there. 21.4 rebounds per 48, a lot of blocks. He's really playing well.
Well, I mean, this is not, I'm going to call it the Horace Grant problem, which is anytime you have kind of an absurd team, like 55 wins or more, it's usually not one player. I mean, even I'm going to look at this real quick and kind of cheat. The Warriors, I mean, yes, Steph Curry is playing out of his mind, but I've got to buy, if I sort by wins, if I go to the Golden State Warriors and sort by wins, Andre Iguodala, star level. Draymond Green, star level. Harrison Barnes, very good. Ian Clark in 17 minutes is apparently a perfect player, as is Andrew Bogut in 19 minutes. You mentioned this to me, Festus Ezeli, not quite star, but playing very well. I mean, essentially, the only two players we should really point out. Actually, three, and all three of these I'm not surprised by. Maurice Spates, we were very surprised they brought back, isn't playing well. Leandro Barbosa has no reason being on a team at this point. I didn't even realize he was still playing. Sad for you right now, but it's only 30 minutes, Brian, is James Michael McAdoo is currently
Oh
playing.
yeah, my boy McAdoo, but he'll get better.
But I mean, beyond those three players, you've got the entire team playing well and multiple star level players. Any great team has at least, at bare minimum, two star players. It's as simple as that. And so it's not a surprise, when a player gets a lot of credit for an undefeated team, you go, yes, yes, I have no, and we even agree, by the way. Blake Griffin is the best player on the Clippers right now and one of the best players in the NBA right now. But we're also saying, hey, he's sitting right next to an amazing center as well, and that's not surprising because this is a great team right now. And one thing that's actually shocked me, and I'm going to see if I can look this up quickly. I don't think I'm too surprised, but Chris Paul is playing good, but not great. So
Yeah.
if Chris Paul tonight, if Chris Paul steps it up, and I mean, if you play to your level of competition, Chris Paul, if he plays like a star, they could actually make the Warriors bleed.
Yeah, and just to finish up on the Warriors, so Barbosa, I was surprised they brought him in too, but he actually played really well last year. He's Steve Kerr's guy from Phoenix, so that's kind of where the connection is. But yeah, maybe he is really old. Maybe he's finally getting there. But just the last thing is, what we said in the preseason on the Warriors was, so the only thing that can derail them is injuries, right? The same story every year. Bogut hasn't been playing. He's got a concussion right now, and they just don't care. They're still rolling people over.
Well, there is an injury threshold for any team, Brian, obviously, right? Michael, let's look at the Bulls. The one team that I always like comparing the Warriors to, and sorry for the Warriors' centricness nature, as long as Steph Curry is playing like the best offensive player since Michael Jordan, one thing I stressed on that, as I said, I don't think he's MJ-like. They had completely different games. But I think MJ and Steph Curry have such unique games that there has never been an offensive player like Steph Curry in the NBA. It's literally absurd. But what I was going to say is, you look at the 1992 Bulls, who went on to win the title. If you look at the margin of victory and strength of schedule, they are the only team other than the Warriors last season in the modern NBA with the three-point line where it's at, because don't forget from 1996 and 1997, the three-point line was reined in, to have a 10-point margin of victory. That I think that's a lot of qualifiers, but essentially the only team kind of like the Warriors was the 92 Bulls. In 93, they repeated, and in 94, they lost Michael Jordan and still won 55 games. So any team has they were able to overcome the loss of Jordan and still be a contender. They didn't repeat a third time, but I'm just saying you could take the best player off that team and they were still a contender. Every team has a injury threshold. The Warriors, if they lose Steph Curry, they turn into a 50-win team, no doubt. But the Warriors are really deep and have a lot of young talent. I mean, I can't really lament their building strategy. They have really been drafting well and developing well, and they've got Draymond Green and Steph Curry for long term. I'm not a huge fan of Klay Thompson, but his contract in the new CBA is actually quite reasonable. It's really easy to be excited about this team if you're a Warriors fan.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just an aside, I've got this 91-92 Bulls team up here. And Horace Grant actually outproduced Michael Jordan that season, like you were saying. He's very underrated.
It's true. I mean, Horace Grant, I don't know if I'll write these, but, one of the things I've kind of mentioned is I kind of plan to have a Tuesday column, and, every other week is kind of opinion, every other week is Stats 101. One of the columns I've been kind of gestating on, and if anybody out there wants to steal the idea, I can write mine and you can write yours, and these both work, is like players that should have banners. And Horace Grant is underrated both in that he doesn't, he should be retired in the Bulls arena. And second, I think basically, as I kind of the rabbit hole we went down here is, great teams need multiple stars. The reason I said Horace Grant is I think people will sometimes miss that, hey, yes, they have one or two really good players, but there are 3, 4, 5 sometimes players on great teams, and DeAndre Jordan counts. All right, let's finish out the top 10 because there are 4 names I really want to get through. So Russell Westbrook still playing like a star.
Oh, and we crashed Skype here.
For 48.
Oh, right, we're back. We're back, Dre. Keep going.
Oh, what happened? Where did we lose?
We just lost a few seconds here, but we got a little video issue, so keep talking.
I think I just said Russell Westbrook is still back, still a triple-double machine per 48. So, holy cow. I'm not seeing Kevin Durant on the first page. So, I might have to search for that. So it's hard to say if Kevin Durant's back, but, they still got Russell Westbrook. The one name that I kind of want to just kind of shake my head right now at is Dirk Nowitzki is currently playing at star level. And basically, I know as much as I've been patting myself on the back for stuff we said right, Dirk Nowitzki is currently playing at star level. I think preseason I basically said, hey, he's old, he's finished. They're playing 4-on-5 with this guy. So he's actually been rebounding, which is kind of absurd. So I don't know what to say about that.
Well, it's hard not to root against Dirk sometimes. He had a pretty cool Halloween costume this year, I think. I'm trying to remember what it was, but good for Dirk.
You can't beat LeBron James's Prince. Okay, Hassan Whiteside is number 9. This was a player that Patrick said he believed in and basically said he's the future of Miami. It's the rest of the team we have to question. Langston Galloway is a surprise one. Young player for the Knicks, got minutes last season. Again, what we can expect in the coming weeks is some of these names to just completely disappear and be like, oh, what was that? And some of these names to stay up here, and then some new names to come in. I kind of am thinking Langston Galloway is probably going to go by the wayside, but he's a young player, and that's, if you're a Knicks fan, you don't have a lot to be excited about. So Langston Galloway right there.
Well, so let's do a little stat exercise right here, Dre. Why is Langston Galloway so good? It looks like he's shooting 67.2 true shooting, so maybe that's part of it. He can't maintain that, but he is getting 9 rebounds per 48. That's pretty impressive for a guard. Maybe he will be valuable later.
All right, so nice softball. Okay, so if you go to the Tools tab, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in Langston Galloway, and by default it will look for players in this season, so that's perfect. So I'm going to look at Langston Galloway. I'm looking at Langston Galloway, and we consider Langston Galloway to be a shooting guard. And what you've got is you've got the raw stats of Langston Galloway per 48 minutes in the first column, and the raw stats of an average shooting guard in the second column. And as we noted, at the top, his wins per 48 is 0.41. That means he's 4 times as good as an average shooting guard. Points over par is 9.7. That means in a full game, we'd expect him to help a team win by plus 10. But let's break down what he's doing. Defensive rebounding is, rebounding for a guard is the huge part. He's basically averaging 9 boards per 48 minutes, and particularly the key one is the offensive rebounds. These are the valuable ones, right? These are a do-over on offense. He is, almost averaging 4 times as many offensive boards as an average shooting guard. That is huge, and I think it's one of those things that people, don't get. Now, as a shooting guard, he's averaging 4.9 assists per 48, and we don't expect the average shooting guard to actually assist that much, so that's huge too. He's passing the ball, he's getting the ball. That's huge. Now, blocks, he's actually below average, 0.4, but this is a position where we don't really expect that. So if he's not great at a skill that we don't really expect at a position, it's not going to ding him. And then a key part here is he is shooting the ball a lot. He is passing the ball a lot, but his turnovers are super low. An average guard, shooting guard, we'd expect to turn the ball over 2.4 times per 48. Langston Galloway is doing it less than once per 48. And the last thing, this doesn't, these last 2 stats don't help or hurt, but his steals, he's basically close to average, and he fouls a little more. But, you basically add up the positive, all of these things, take out the negative, and he's way good. And then the last thing you mentioned, which is huge, is he is shooting currently 67.2 true shooting. That's factoring in free throws, 3-point shots. And, he's basically attempting. He's not shooting as much as we would expect an average shooting guard to shoot. Average shooting guard would shoot 18 shots per 48. He's only shooting 12. Average shooting guard, we'd expect to get about 5 free throws a game. He's getting about 6. So, essentially he is still getting fewer shots, but he's so efficient on them and then doing everything else well. That's why Langston Galloway is playing star level right now.
So what's our kind of prescription for Langston Galloway? That percentage will go down, but maybe he'll get more shots. Yeah, our prescription, or that's probably the wrong word.
He got a rash or something?
Well, so where's he going to end up? Like, what could happen next? So that shooting percentage will go down for sure, right? But maybe they'll give him some more shots since he's been playing well. But stuff like rebounding, that's very consistent. So maybe he'll be able to keep that up.
It is worth noting that he's a young player. That's the key part. That's why you should be excited about it. And if we look last season, his assists are like dead on for last season, but he's got his turnovers more under control. His shooting is way better, and his rebounding is higher. So what I would say is he's a young player. We'd expect some improvement from last season. And last season, he was a good rookie. So I would actually expect him to play like a very good player. I'm just, it's a funny thing. It's a mean thing. When you see a young player that you haven't seen before playing really, really, really well, you kind of expect some degradation. And that's almost anybody, right? Like even Steph Curry, who we're super excited about, I don't expect him to keep playing this well. So my prediction for Langston Galloway, he's going to keep rebounding well. He's going to keep passing well. His turnovers might go up and his shooting might go down. He'll be a good player, maybe not a star, but if he keeps up the what I will stress is barring his 66.7 true shooting percentage, all of those other numbers seem sustainable. So if he keeps all of those up, he could be a great player.
Awesome.
And by the way, the honorable mention players, because basically I just did do the top 10. The honorable mention I just got to give a shout out is Kenneth Faried. Kenneth Faried is an honorable mention, still a great player. Ricky Rubio might actually be back. Patrick might have something to be excited about. Mike Conley, only bright spot for Memphis, and then Rudy Gobert and Derek Favors, who we already discussed, still playing well for Utah. And then actually what we should mention, two things for the Cleveland Cavaliers fans out there. Kevin Love might actually be back, and he's actually getting the ball without Kyrie Irving on the floor, so there might be hope there. And Matthew Dellavedova, who was above average last season, is currently playing very well. So if Dellavedova plays well, Love actually gets the ball, we could actually see great things. LeBron James is playing good, but what we should kind of in sadness say, LeBron James is playing great for an NBA player. For LeBron James, he's on a decline. So, you should be excited that, you've got three great players on your team, Cleveland, but you should also be sad to be going, this is probably the tail end of the peak LeBron, best player in NBA history, in my opinion, ever. And sorry, it's too easy, Brian. There's too many names on this list. The one last name, I'm going to be done after this. Greg Monroe, who Milwaukee picked up, is still playing at star level. So the Milwaukee Bucks record isn't fantastic, but Greg Monroe's looking good. So that's a little thing to be excited about.
Yeah, and just a shout out to our superstar commenter, Andrew Sutton, who loves Hassan Whiteside and embraces the Wiltside nickname. I agree. Good job, Wiltside.
All right. So we're almost, like I mentioned, I think I want to keep this about 45 minutes, and we're almost there, Brian. In fact, we went a little over. But let's talk. I released an article this week called Usage is Still Useless. And all I want to stress about this is it's very common for me as I look over advanced, I'll put that in quotes, basketball stats to see people quoting all sorts of different stats they found on sites. Per is still among one of the most popular. Stats like Dre, I think Dre from Nylon Calculus.
Yeah.
Number Fire has something called Nerd. There's just a plethora. And I mean, by the way, to be fair, we fall on this. We have wins produced in points over par. If you're going to use a stat, you have to ask yourself, what is the stat telling me, and what's the question I'm trying to use it to answer? Because it's possible, right? So this is a common one. The wins produced stat is not, I stress this for the millionth time, commenters, a predictive stat. It is a descriptive stat. That's probably actually my next Stats 101 post, predictive versus descriptive.
Ooh, I can't
wins
wait.
produced tells you what happened in the game, what happened in the season, and how we can kind of credit who did what there, right? And this is, but let's just be clear, it's nothing surprising, right? Steph Curry is easily the best player on the Warriors, but we know this season there's going to be a game that the Warriors win by 20, and it's going to be Klay Thompson or Draymond Green or Andre Iguodala or Andrew Bogut. Geez, that team is stacked, Ryan. I'm so jealous. Anyway, there's going to be a game where not Steph Curry essentially wins the game. That's not going to stop Steph Curry from being the best player, and if we record the points over par metric for that game, we'll say Klay Thompson was the game MVP. That's descriptive. That's what happened. It's not going to say that we expect Klay Thompson to be the best Warrior for the rest of the season. So anyway, if you're doing that, if you're using, so a stat can be like that. It can be descriptive, and it can also be used to be predictive because you ask a question and you say, can the stat I'm using answer that? So the reason I brought up usage is a stat that basically says I record my free throws and shots and turnovers, and I compare them to my teams, and it's basically a per minute stat, and I say that gives me an estimate of how many times a given player finishes the possessions. And then the way people try and use that, the question they try and answer is, does this stat tell me how much certain players hold the ball? People with higher usage probably have higher, hold the ball more. And that is true. There is a correlation. But with new statistics, basically stats.nba.com, we didn't even use that one, Brian. We'll have to do that next week.
Oh, yeah, the game flow is the good one there, right? We really like that game flow.
Well, stats.nba.com has, rundowns of time of possession and touches and per game. They actually have per game information and contested shots. So apologies, dear listener. That was a site. I'll add that to the links, but we didn't really jump into depth. But stats.nba.com has all of this data. And I basically pulled down the time of possession data and the touches data. That's how many times a player touches the ball. Thank you, commenter Bjorn, who will get a shout out. I corrected it to be per minute. So the initial article is per game, but per minute. And I said, if we look at per minute, how much a player is touching the ball, or per minute, like, if there's a 48-minute game, what percentage of that am I holding the ball? How does that line up to usage? And the answer is not very well. And the three players that I love, love, love for this are Russell Westbrook, John Wall, and Ricky Rubio from last season. Ricky Rubio has a very low usage relatively for a point guard, about, I think like about 15, but he holds the ball just as much as Russell Westbrook. John Wall is in the middle, right? He does some shooting, some passing. But the simple point is, if you kind of make a scatter plot like I did in this article, Brian, and you kind of get a square pattern, which you'll notice both of these kind of have. They both have a square, and you have a correlation below 0.5. So for those of you that don't know, correlation is basically like if I tried to draw a line between two sets of data, how well it would line up. One is perfect. They line up perfectly. Zero is bad. They don't line up at all. Basically, usage versus touches, usage versus time of possession is about a 0.4, which means it's related, but it's not very good. So really, this article was really just intended to say, we have new data. We have old popular stats that attempt to answer a question. Does the new data line up with what people say? And the answer is very simply no. And I do think this is important because usage is still one of those stats that's thrown around a lot. And like I said, commonly used to justify, the player has a high usage. So of course their shooting efficiency is low. And all you have to say is, yeah, guess what? There are players that have really high usage, but have, my favorite one here is DeMarcus Cousins. DeMarcus Cousins has a 34.1% usage. But then if you look at like touches per game and time of possessions per game, he only holds the ball like essentially, if DeMarcus Cousins played the full game, and that would be 5 players, so you'd expect, each player to basically hold the ball 10 minutes, he would only hold the ball about 4 minutes, but he would basically account for, 33% of your shots and turnovers, which is not a good thing.
Yeah, and some of the other examples used here was Ricky Rubio, Chris Paul, John Wall, and Russell Westbrook. Even though they all held the ball for a similar amount of time, makes sense, right? They're all point guards, really good point guards on good teams right now anyway, but their usages vary dramatically.
Yeah, I mean, Ricky Rubio, essentially when we adjust per minute, held the ball for like the longest of the point guards last season. Basically, it was 12 minutes a game, essentially. But his usage is only 20% because he passes like heck, whereas Russell Westbrook held the ball actually less time per game than Ricky Rubio, 10.7 minutes per 48, but he had a 38.4% usage. And that to me basically answers it. If we have enough cases of that where we can have two players that have the same usage and then have very dramatically on time of possession or touches, or two players that have the same time of possession and vary greatly on usage, and there are tons of these players, we basically answer the question, this is a bad proxy metric. And this is a stats thing. In modeling, we like to use proxy metrics. You might say like use a country's GDP to kind of estimate certain wealth things. And you say, well, does that really answer what I'm trying to get at? And that's all I want to stress is usage does not answer the question people use it for. Usage in light of new data isn't really, that useful. And basically you should be looking at like shooting efficiency, assist to turnover ratio, and then things like touches and time of possession.
Right, and a key point is a lot of those stats are now available because of Sports VU or Sports View, whatever it's called.
Sports VU.
Yeah. So that's on all the teams now, and as we start to get more and more of that data, why are we looking at usage anymore?
Well, it's just worth noting that this is a common point I brought up a lot. I think we're going a little over. Sorry about that, Brian.
Oh, no problem.
But back in the day, the only real stats for NBA teams, you can go to Basketball Reference and look at like 1960s game, was the box score in the paper. And the box score on the paper was severely limited. It didn't used to record assists, blocks, turnovers, all this stuff. It basically just used to say, I think, basically points, fouls, and then I think team rebounds. So that's what it used to have. And then we got the updated box score, like with the ABA and the merger. So in the 1970s, we got an updated box score. There's better data. So why would you not use the new data? And then in 2000s, we got play-by-play, and this lets you look at other stuff if you want, things like Popcorn Machine. And then we got Sports View. So we keep progressively getting better and better data. And it's not to say that the old data, I can look at a player in the 60s and look at their shooting efficiency, number of shots per game, compare them to league average and get some indication of how good of a shooter they were. But I'm not going to be able to guess how good they are at other things without that new data. And so that's the key point to me is that if you're using old data to answer a question and you find out that old data doesn't really work to answer the question, you have to stop using it. And the unfortunate part I see in advanced stats in basketball primarily is no one likes giving up on bad metrics, and you kind of have to. You kind of just have to say, look, Per was a good attempt by John Hollinger, right? Good job. And back in the days when teams were still basically just looking at points per games and points per game and saying Allen Iverson was the best, John Hollinger tried to adjust for pace and tried to adjust for all this stuff and came up with a new metric. And good on you, but you pass it through some tests and you go, no, it doesn't work. Same thing with like usage. You go, Dean Oliver tried to come up with a good proxy metric for this thing he was trying to answer. We can now answer that. No, and that is an important part of being a data scientist, is looking at data and going, I really wish this data answered this question. There's so much data here, right? It's possible for me to collect tons and tons of data, and I run the regressions, I run the analysis, and I go, unfortunately, this data is noise. Unfortunately, this data is garbage. Unfortunately, this data that I thought was recording X doesn't. And that's what you have to do. And just kind of the condescending tone to the basketball statistics community. I don't see us doing that as a community, and it makes me a little sad. But that's just where we're at. And I'm just saying, this article, I'm hoping to say, hey, this is a stat we can drop from our quiver and use newer ones.
Yeah, and one of the things we always like to point out is, well, first of all, John Hollinger and Dean Oliver both, like, those are the two original guys to start doing real stat work in basketball, and it let, and Dave Barry came after that with Wins Produced and built on that stuff, right?
Dave Barry was doing research around the exact same time as Basketball on Paper. If you look in a chapter in Basketball on Paper, Dave's college work, his initial model, which wasn't the Wins Produced model, but it was similar. One of his initial models actually shows up in Basketball on Paper.
But my only point is, John Hollinger does some good stuff early on. He goes to ESPN. He's getting paid to produce all these articles, right? And he's like, oh, okay, let's throw Per out there. Then he left ESPN. Now he's working in the NBA. And one of the things we've been saying is we don't think John Hollinger's moves as a GM go along with Per. Like, we think he's probably ignoring it and using better stuff now.
No, he was, even if you looked at his team level data that he was doing for ESPN, it didn't really match up with what Per was saying. And that's not a problem. And I'm saying the annoying issue is, even in the wake of Moneyball, you've got me going over, Brian, but in the wake of Moneyball, they basically said all these old stats are bad and da-da-da-da. And all of the sabermetricians said, victory for us. You had a pitcher with a losing record win a Cy Young, and it's victory for statistics. Go to a baseball game and they still record like RBIs. It's a matter of, you have communities that build around liking stats. And when you tell them, hey, the stat's not really useful, we should stop using it, we shouldn't mention it, it's really hard, right? Because if your entire career you've been saying, wow, these players have the best batting average, and I come and say batting average is a bad stat, use this instead, most of those players are going to say, people are going to say, no, I've been using that forever. And it's the same with basketball. And so, I don't expect this article that's going to be read by a fraction of the basketball statistics community to change anybody's mind. But if a few of you out there do, hopefully I'll make better data scientists in the future.
Yeah, boy, and this was a really great show, Dre. Just kind of a window into how we're looking at the early NBA season and what our techniques are, and it's been a lot of fun.
What I will say, this is what I love about the live season, Brian, is if we don't have anything, if like day before the show, I get a concussion and I'm in the hospital all day.
Oh, just like Andrew Bogut.
Yeah, that was the reference. I say, hey, I really want to, do a show still. All we have to do is go to that player tab and sort, or the teams tab and look, or, it's so easy to talk about the NBA when it's going full steam, when you've got 5 to 10 games going every night. I love it. I love it so much. And there are going to be so many exciting stories, and we'll be bringing them to you every week.
And here's my last thing on this is a lot of people, maybe Charles Barkley and the type, they look down at advanced stats and they think that people try to use it to end arguments, right? Like, I've got this one number and boom, the argument's over, right? Because of that number. But what we're saying is...
To be fair, though, I hate to cut you off. To be fair, in sports, that already happens, right? At the end of the game, you go, who had the most points? They win, right?
Yeah.
That's argument ending. Sorry, continue.
No, I was going to say is the way we're looking at it is the opposite, that we look at the numbers and that opens up all these questions. And that's the beginning of the discussion, not the end of it. So anyway, that's how I like to look at it.
It's worth noting that happened for, and I don't believe I'm already dropping his name, but the Knicks player that you brought up, where, basically...
Langston Galloway?
Yeah, Langston Galloway. We're like, oh, he's top 10. Well, we didn't stop there. The next thing is like, well, why is he top? What is he doing?
Yeah.
We expect this to hold up. So lots of stuff there. All right. That's been our show. We end every show with a shout out or a set of shout outs. So we got a couple. Brian, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, no, my only shout out, and I've got to remind myself here. Oh, this is a great shout out. Okay. So one of my favorite NBA resources is the NBA subreddit. there's a lot of those big subreddits are awful, but it's really one of the best ones. And let me bring this up right now on the screen here. So, to be honest, I'm not even going to try to explain this, how funny it is, but the NBA top 10 guy, his name is Bo Estes, it turns out. He's got a little back and forth going with the NBA subreddit. So all I can say is check these 2 links out that we post. You'll not be disappointed. It's really funny stuff.
Awesome. All right. Is that it for you?
That's my only shout out. I'll leave that Derrick Rose one off. It's kind of too mean-spirited, but maybe some people know what I'm talking about.
All right. Well, okay. So I would first like to thank commenter Bjorn. Awesome name, by the way. But yeah, who noticed very quickly, and I'm actually glad about this. I will say, as a data scientist, it's easy to make mistakes sometimes in your spreadsheets or whatever. When I made my usage post, Bjorn noted, hey, why are you doing per game in terms of touches and possession, but then doing per minute, which usage is a per minute stat? And I said, oh, you're right. And I corrected that. So thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate when, you spot check us for factual errors or stuff like that. It's why you're one of the best communities. It's part of being a data scientist. You do the work, you crunch the numbers, and then sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes you have to go back to the drawing board. And, I think we were talking pre-show about this, Brian. It's one of those misconceptions in TV shows, right? The scientists in the lab get it right the first try. Yeah. How many of those murder shows should really be, they come in and they're like, the DNA evidence says it's them, and they're let's roll. And they call them on the phone and go, oh, actually, we were wrong. Sorry, we had a typo in the thing, and it didn't actually match this or whatever. So anyway, thank you, Bjorn. Really happy with the usage post, and happy it's per minute now, and happy I was able to get that corrected so quick, thanks to you. So it was only up like 5 hours before that was fixed, as opposed to a week. All right, next one. It's actually a few weeks overdue. We always shout out Chris Baxter and Brian Sherlaw over at friendzonecomic.com. Occasionally they talk sports, and they have one on bandwagon fans that is my favorite. It's one of my it's an all-time classic to me. Talking, making fun of fair weather fans. It's a great comic. You can probably put it up on the screen, Brian. I'll include a link to the show. It's friendzonecomic.com/comic/bandwagon. We'll have it in the show notes. It's hilarious. If you're not checking out Friendzone Comic, I believe it's every Monday and Thursday. You're missing out. So with that, that's our show. We'll see you next week, either Tuesday or Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you follow all of us, myself, Nerd Numbers, Patrick Minton, NBA Geek on Twitter, and then Boxscore Brian, who's Brian Foster, we'll tweet out so you know when we're going. We'll see you next week at that point. We are the Boxscore Geeks Show. Our site is at boxscoregeeks.com. We are on iTunes and Stitcher as the Boxscore Geeks Show. As I mentioned, when we go live, we are on twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. And if you missed the live show and you want to catch the video, you can find us on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. And with that, we'll see you next week.